who worship the Lord, worship in spirit and truth. Those who say that they know him must walk as he walked. Those who worship the Lord, worship in spirit and truth. Those who say that they know him must walk as he walked. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. If we say that we know him, but we don't keep his word, then we walk in the darkness, and the truth's not in us. If we walk in the light, we will have fellowship sweet, and the blood of Jesus will cleanse us from sin. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light.
Well, good morning, friends. Good to be with everybody this morning. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend, and with whatever you did in your weekend, I am so delighted to be able to be here and to join you and to spend the morning with you, at least the first hour of the morning with you. Maybe it's not your first hour. Maybe some of you have been up for a while and have already had a couple cups of coffee, and maybe others of you have been, your hair is like this, all over the place, and because you're just getting out of bed and you have bedhead. Well, we won't tell anybody. No, we won't. Hey, if you are listening in the background, would love to have you say good morning if you have not yet done so. Saying good morning does help us to have a sense of community among ourselves, among one another. It really, really does. Honestly, I will tell you, at least, and I think everybody else that has already commented here would tell you that saying good morning here in this broadcast does help you take a step toward feeling connected to another living, breathing human being. So I want to encourage you to say good morning if you're listening in the background there. If you're listening in later and not during the live portion, I would still encourage you to say, hey, I listened in here. The more likes and the more comments that we have, the more this kind of boosts things up there in the algorithms, in the Facebook and in the YouTube worlds. So the more that happens, the better. I'd love to see us tip the scale to consistently be over 100 comments. Of course, it helps when I ask questions and things of that nature, which I don't always do But again, the comments that you leave, even saying good morning, does help the algorithm so that it stays a little bit more publicly viewable. Somehow we think that if we're on Facebook, the world sees everything that we say. And now I know that when we stop and think about it, we go, no, I know that that is not true. But sometimes we think it's true. We think the whole world is going to know about us because we put something on Facebook. Listen, much of what the people who put very little on, very few people see, and people who put more on, more. I'm not. I didn't say someone's a moron. I said if people put more on, then there will be more engagement, and the more engagement, the more it drives the engagement. So it all kind of comes together. That's why I encourage your comments. That's why I encourage your questions. That's why I encourage your prayer requests. That's why I encourage you to say good morning, minimally, if you're here during the live element, or just to say, hey, I listened in later on in the day, and it just helps the Facebook algorithm. So. So I just want to make sure that you understand how those things work, and that you get to do your part. We are in the book of Ecclesiastes. Last week we did chapter 7, and we are going to pick back up in chapter 7 again, because last week I said I would like for us to come back and view chapter 7 through the lens of Eugene Peterson's The Message Paraphrase. To see what insights we might get, to see how it might rattle our minds a little bit, or our souls. So we are going to take a look here at the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, at least read it in the Message Paraphrase before we move on to chapter 8. That's what I said we would do last week, and I want to remember what I said we would do and help us to, in fact, do that very thing. So here we go. A good reputation is better than a fat bank account. Your death date tells more than your birth date. I mean, really, it does. It tells you how long you lived, how many days you may have been upon this earth, and there's other things that come out of that. You learn more at a funeral than at a feast. After all, that's where we all end up, and we might discover something from it. Crying is better than laughing. It blotches the faith, but scours the heart. You ever been in a spot in your life where you just needed a good cry? I have been there at times. I've been in a spot where I've needed a good laugh, or I have needed a good cry. Now, our dear friends in Pennsylvania, Dennis and Debbie Bear, certainly have the ability to bring out the laughter, and they bring out in me the type of laughter that none of you want to hear, because it's the type of laughter that is, I sound like a hyena, and then tears start to flow, and then I hope my bladder holds and all that. I mean, they just bring out this hysterical laugh that gets other people laughing. And so there's laughter is good, but also sometimes we just need to cry it out. And, you know, those of us that live here in New England, especially those of us in Maine, we are Mainas, you know, and we don't show emotion, no. But we need to. We are created as emotional beings, so laughing and crying both can be good for us. Crying is better than laughing. It says here in verse 3, it blotches the faith but scours the heart. Sometimes we need a good cry to scour the heart. Verse 4 says, sages invest themselves in hurt and grieving. Fools waste their lives in fun and games. And he says this in verse 5, you'll get more from the rebuke of a sage than from the song and dance of fools. And the question for us is, how do we take a rebuke if somebody were to rebuke us for something? How do we take that? You'll get more from the rebuke of a sage than from the song and dance of fools. A willingness to hear hard truth from somebody speaking into our lives, that is something that we need to have. So would we take that? Would we accept that? Would we accept the rebuke of a sage? Just think about it for a moment. When somebody has done that to you, I mean, what is our normal response when someone rebukes us or confronts us? I mean, do we go, oh, yeah, I've been wanting to hear that? No, we usually don't respond that way. And in the comments there, if you have the capability to do so, maybe you could leave a comment on what you think the human tendency or even your very own tendency is when someone confronts you. I mean, how do you respond to that? Verse 5 said, you'll get more from the rebuke of a sage than from the song and dance of fools. Again, think about what is the typical response of people when they're rebuked by a sage. Just think about that and maybe put something in the comments along those lines. And we continue on. It says, the giggles of fools are like the crackling of twigs under the cooking pot and like smoke. I mean, it's just there. And brutality stupefies even the wise and destroys the strongest heart. And brutality can do that. Even though the brutality of a word can do that, can destroy a strong heart. Sticks and stones might break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I don't believe that is true. I think words do hurt us. Now, we will make a statement like that to hide behind the fact that words do hurt us, but words do hurt us. So a few of you responding to the question about how we respond to the rebuke of a sage. Brenda says we get defensive. And Priscilla says, I think we're apt to bristle, to be put on guard. And I mean, it's the defensiveness of posture that will often happen to us, that we go on the defensive and perhaps bristle. But I think, and the scriptures I think would verify this both here in Ecclesiastes as well as in the book of Proverbs, that when we are learning wisdom and we're learning to be wise, we learn then to accept the rebuke of another person. We hear them out. We don't get mad. We don't get defensive. We don't try to justify why we are what we are or why we've done what we've done. We take it. We listen to it. We meditate upon it and then make corrective action if that is what we need to do. So thanks for some responses there. Much appreciated. Say good morning. Okay, and moving on, down at verse 8 to 8, it says, endings are better than beginnings. Sticking to it is better than standing out. I mean, sticking to it, that can be a tough thing. You know, the days of COVID, I have maintained as a pastor, I just want to be faithful and steady going through COVID, because it has brought so much with it, so much, and things I think seem to be settling down, but it has brought so much angst among people. I'll use that word. It was a word I didn't use much until I came to Maine, and my good friend Dave Sheldon, it's a word that he will use about people's angst. But just the idea to stick to it, to finish. I have not always been a finisher, and I'm not even sure that our particular group of people here are finishers. We like to start things, but maybe not finish things. And can I suggest that the endings of things, finishing things, are better than beginning things? I've been in a home, a particular home, and I won't say whose home it was, where they started projects from stem to stern of their house, from the front foyer to the back porch and everything in between, turned upside down because of projects. And now in that particular case, those people worked hard and they got the projects done. But how many of us are the type that start lots of things and don't finish many things? It just kind of a challenge for us there to become finishers. Priscilla, still responding to the question about how to respond to people who confront us. I'd like to think I'd listen and consider graciously, but doesn't always happen. And that's honest. And I appreciate that level of honesty that you are demonstrating there, because I mean, those are the facts. I don't always. I mean, there's an area of my life I need to continue working on. I can be a fiery individual, and that's okay if it's a passion, but not an anger. And so it's an area I need to continue working, that I would also consider graciously consider what is being said. And I need to continue working at that. Let's continue on, because I really wanted just to help us read down through this in the Message translation. And Don has a good insight here. He says, the level of our defensiveness depends on the tone of the issue presented. And I think that's true. I mean, things can be couched in a certain way. Words can be said in a certain way, or in a certain tone, or even in a certain timing, in a way that they're not well received. So, tone, timing, the very selection of the words, that can be another factor in how we respond to the things that people might say to us. So my fingers aren't working right this morning as I'm trying to type something there. Verse 9 says this. Sorry if you hear the crunching on the last little bit of remaining cough drop in my mouth. It says, don't be quick to fly off the handle. Anger boomerangs. You can spot a fool by the lumps on his head. Now, Peterson is talking about figurative lumps. How many lumps is this person inflicted upon themselves through their anger? So don't be quick to fly off the handle. Anger boomerangs. And I've already mentioned, I've said, some of you already know this about me. Some of you don't know this about me. Excuse me. But anger can be one of those areas where we fly off the handle. And I have been a fly off the handler. Anybody else with me in that? Anybody else raise their hand and go, yeah, that's me too. I can fly off the handle from the words that we say. Maybe you're a person that would be inclined to pick something up and throw it. I was looking for something to throw, but I don't have anything soft here that I want to throw, and I don't feel like throwing something, but sometimes we can be those people who do that very thing, who fly off the handle. It says, don't be quick to fly off the handle, anger boomerangs. It comes back at us, and it might not come back at us the first time. It might come back at us later on. It might be a residual buildup of plaque of anger, and it creates problems. Someone might take it the first time. They might take it the second time. But there comes a point where people see a pattern in us and go, I don't want to be around that person, because they get angry. They fly off the handle. They say things that are, they throw things. A friend of mine several months ago, in response to something I'd posted on Facebook, said, they gave me several compliments, and they said, and you're awfully intimidating. And I had to go back to the individual and say, what did you mean? I don't think I'm intimidating. He said, you get angry, you're intimidating. And and I did not take that as a compliment. And it wasn't a slap in the face. Those were the words of a sage being spoken to me. And I had to take them to heart. So for us to learn from this, to not be quick to flow off, I can't talk this morning either. Don't be quick to fly off the handle. And then also it said this, and we talked about this last week. And again, I just wanted to really just read through this chapter in the Message, but I'm finding myself giving plenty of commentary. Don't always be asking, where are the good old days? Wise folks don't ask questions like that. The good old days are never going to come back. We're never going to go back there. And the wise person is saying, how do we live in the days in which we are currently living? And how do we move forward into our future? Verse 11 says, wisdom is better when it's paired with money, especially if you get both while you're still living. So his take on it is, if you just get money, you might be foolish with it, but apply wisdom to your money, and it's not a bad thing. Verse 12 says double protection, wisdom and wealth. Plus, this is bonus. Wisdom energizes its owner to get energy through wisdom. Then in verse 13, take a good look at God's word. Who could simplify and reduce creation's curves and angles to a plain straight line? I mean, when you take a look at God's work, who could simplify and reduce creation's curves and angles to a plain straight line? God can do that. God can do whatever he wants to do with creation. He can make mountains into plains and plains into mountains. He has that capacity. So we look at God's work and we acknowledge God's worth. We take a look at God's worth and we acknowledge that God is great and mighty and all-knowing and all-powerful. And he is able to take that which is complex in his mind, simplify it. I think the human body is incredibly complex in the way things function and the necessity of our nutrition, the necessity of how much fluid we take in, and supplements, whether through food or through supplementation or combination of both. Exercise, all those things factor together to make this incredible human body function as it does. And I am just stupefied at, a body my size has roughly 70,000 miles of blood vessels in it, according to the scientist. And how quickly do the neurons fire, and all that science has shown about the human body, for me, that has only given me more cause and more reason to want to worship God. So take a good look at God's work, it said in verse 13. Verse 14 says, on a good day, enjoy yourself. On a bad day, examine your conscience. God arranges for both kinds of days so that we don't take anything for granted. Okay, so we can blame God for our bad days. It says God arranges both kinds of days so that we don't take anything for granted. You having a good morning already this morning? Yes, you're having a good morning. Thank God for it. You got up out of the wrong side of the bed this morning? Well, even there, thank God for it. On a good day, enjoy yourself. On a bad day, examine your conscience. Verse 15, he says this, I've seen it all in my brief and pointless life. Here's a good person cut down in the middle of doing good, and there's a bad person living a long life of sheer evil. I met yesterday with my son-in-law at Rollies to have wings, and I did not know that on Sundays it is Dollar Wing Day at Rollies. And as we sat there and we had rich and robust philosophical and theological conversation, we had the type of conversation that came to a verse like this about a good person being cut down in the middle of doing good while an evil person continues right on. Life doesn't always make sense. Life isn't always fair. The good person, the old song that some of you would remember, only the good die young. And I've seen people that have been health and fitness buffs, and then I've seen other people eating burgers and drinking beers and smoking cigarettes every single day of their life, and they live to be 100 years old. I don't get it. Yet you'll see a fitness buff who eats right and meal preps and exercises right, and then midstream in their 30s ends up with cancer and dies. I just don't get it. But these are things that the skeptical teacher in Ecclesiastes is saying, look, these are the realities of life. And the sooner that we're able to acknowledge these realities of life, to live in these realities of life, the sooner we'll be able to have a little bit of peace in our lives. When we try to have it all figured out and have it all make sense, when it doesn't make sense, we leave ourselves in a place of consternation. We leave ourselves in a place of internal conflict because it's just not right. It's just not fair. What is rightness? What is fairness? Yes, there is right. There is wrong. There is moral right and there is moral wrong. But often what we see in our world isn't right, and what we see in our world isn't fair. And this skeptical teacher in the book of Ecclesiastes is concluding that very thing. And when we come to the point of Noah is saying that only at death is there fairness. Only at death will all things be made right, especially for the believer. When we can come to that point, when we can know that we're not going to be exempted from illness or exempted from hard times, we're not going to be exempted from death, then we can face life with a new type of resolve that we know we're going to face these things. We know we're going to go through these things. We're not exempted because we're Christians. Some Christians think, well, all Christians we should be exempted. Well, I don't read it that way in the scriptures. I'm sorry. You might be able to pick out some verses or form a theology that says that is the truth. But when you look at all of scripture, and when you look at the wisdom literature of Job and Ecclesiastes and the Proverbs, we understand that life will not be fair. He goes on and says this in verse 16, bottom of the page. So don't knock yourself out being good, and don't go overboard being wise. Believe me, you won't get anything out of it. And we talked about this at length on Friday. To knock yourself out, to go to such a measure that you just don't have any peace. That's what he's talking about here, to knock yourself out. There are people who are all knotted up internally because they never feel like they can be good enough. And they never feel like they can be wise enough. They always feel like there's more to learn and they're not doing enough right. And they're just a ball of nerves all the time. I think the teacher here is saying, don't do that. Don't do that to yourself. It doesn't lead to anything good. He says you won't get anything out of it. You're not going to get the extra gain that you think you're going to get. Now, I'm thinking of some individuals, even as I read that, who would say, that's me. I do that. I am a ball of nerves because I'm always trying to please people, or always trying to please God, or always trying to do more to make myself seem more righteous. And yet you're missing out the simple pleasure of God. You're missing out on the simple enjoyment of God and of what God could do in and through your life if you would bring yourself to a place of simply enjoying Him. Well, that was verse 16. Verse 17, again, I'm just trying to get through this because I had promised you on Friday we would take a look at the Message paraphrase. Verse 17 says, don't press your luck by being bad either. Don't be reckless. Why die needlessly? So verse 16 and 17 in this particular chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes is a series of comparisons. I mean, you can press your luck by being bad if you want to, but he says don't do that either. Don't go overboard and obsess on making your life the absolute best and the most righteous and the most moral and the most. You can obsess and be a sick person doing that, but you could take the other approach too. And so he's not advocating that we take the approach of just, hey, I'll just leave it all to the wind. He's not saying that either. Don't press your luck by being bad, and don't be reckless. Why die needlessly? Well, before we go on, take that cup of coffee or tea or water or juice or whatever it is you might have. Let's pick it up. Let's have a little sipsy here. A little bit of fellowship through some liquid refreshment. Mm. So while I was sitting at Rolly's having wings with my son-in-law yesterday, and I had a great time, I had this crazy idea of Sunday afternoon wings and the Word. Am I crazy or what? Show up at Rolly's, get one of the front tables or the back room table, order a bunch of wings, $1 wings, that's a pretty good price, and have Bibles open. Of course, I thought about Bibles and stuff on your fingers from eating wings, but there are people that would probably do something like that might not even go to church, but they would sit in a place like Rolly's and eat wings and have Bibles open. And I mean, you might even order a Guinness or something like that. I'm not advocating for or against that, but I just had that idea. Because I've been in other situations and circumstances with other people beyond our church who have sat in pubs and had rich and robust theological conversation. We were talking about, I'm going on the rabbit trail now, and I'm going to acknowledge that the institutional church just isn't for everybody. Now, there are some people that expect certain things in the church. And what we do as church, we think this is the only way to do church. It's not. Some churches think you need to have all the lights and all the cameras and all the tech and all the production and churches that do that very, very well. It's a fantastic thing. And that preach the word and are true to the gospel. It's a good thing. Other people think when I go to church, I want to have a more liturgically connected experience. So that's what other people think of when they think of going to church. Other people think of going to church, why hang out with all those hypocrites? That's me. That's you too, friend. And I'm pointing at you. I'm not saying you, the listening audience, but the person that's calling me a hypocrite. Guess what? So are you. Hypocrisy is a human trait, not just a Christian trait. Sometimes we as Christians can be the worst at it, though, especially if we're telling everybody how they need to live a righteous life, yet we're not doing so ourselves. But there are people who may not go into a church who would go into a home. I mean, I've thought a couple things. Word and Wings Sundays. I've thought about the Friday table, something that we may create, a place to sit at the table. We'll eat, we'll share, and we'll grow together. Another concept I've had for people that maybe just the church thing just doesn't work for them. And there are other models out there, and I think it's wise to pursue several different types of model to appeal to several different types of people. Sometimes we want to squeeze everybody into a mold, and I don't think we have to do that. Let's continue on here. That was my rabbit trail. I'm going to come back to the text. Verse 20. No, verse 18. It says, it's best to stay in touch with both sides of an issue. A person who fears God deals responsibly with all of reality, not just a piece of it. Now, that is quite a statement there. A person who deals responsibly with all reality, not just a piece of it. And sometimes we will do that. Life is complex, friends. Life is made up of so many different pieces and so many factors and so many elements, and there's always more to the story. Again, yesterday, as I was talking with Nate, we were just talking about some individual situations, and it's like, but we don't know what's behind why someone did what they did. We don't know the whole story, and oftentimes we'll make a judgment when we're just looking at the face value of something, but if you knew the backstory behind it, we might have a little bit different sense of perspective on the situation. So verse 18 said, it is best to stay in touch with both sides of an issue. A person who fears God deals responsibly with all of reality. Is that you? Is that me? Do we deal responsibly with all of reality? I would like to think that I do, at least moderately deal with reality and try to consider all the factors. And there are times when I don't always consider all the factors, but to be able to at least acknowledge that there's more to the story than what I know, and to not make a snap judgment just in the moment. Verse 19 says, wisdom puts more strength in one wise person than 10 strong men can give to a city. Just the idea of the importance of wisdom. There's not totally one good person on earth, not one who is truly pure and sinless. I hope I don't come across as a person who gives the perception that I think that I've got it all wired up. I don't. How about you? What are your areas? What are your sinful proclivities? Are there areas where that would be true of you? So I just want to ask that question. Are you aware that you're not totally a good person? I'm not saying we should wallow around, and I'm not saying that we should go out and hang a banner in front of our house that says, hey, I struggle with such and such a sin. I'm not saying we should go out and put out a banner that says, I'm an alcoholic. I'm not saying we should go out and put out a banner that says I'm an adulterer or a womanizer or a gambler, or I'm not saying that we should do that, but to be able to acknowledge that we have the proclivities, at least with somebody. Or, I might not tell you directly what my proclivities are, but I might tell you that I have sinful proclivities, and I acknowledge, and I'm full well aware of my own proclivities. And I don't want to pretend that I'm something that I'm not. I cling to Christ daily for his forgiveness. I cling to Christ daily for his mercy. I cling to Christ daily for the righteousness that he can give to me that I can't conjure up on my own. I cling to Christ daily. Verse 20, there's not one totally good person on earth, no one who is truly pure and sinless. Verse 21, don't eavesdrop on the conversation of others. What if it's gossip about you and you'd rather not hear it? How about that? You're listening in, and then you begin to hear them. I can see comedy shows where someone's listening in thinking, I'm going to get some juicy morsels, and then all of a sudden it's like their mouth drops open and their eyes get bigger and all of a sudden they realize the person is talking about them. So don't eavesdrop on conversations. And I'm not asking you to comment on this. I'm only asking you to consider this. I mean, are you a person that would have a proclivity toward, I want to hear their conversation. I want to know what they're saying. Are you a person that would tend to then pass on a piece of what you said about what you heard said about a situation? You know what that's called, don't you? There is a word for that. Verse 21 talked about that word. It says this. It says, what if the gossip's about you? I mean, do you have a proclivity toward gossip? And gossip can wound so many situations. Verse 22 continues on and says, you've done that a few times, haven't you? Said things behind someone's back that you wouldn't say to his face. Oh, this just cuts to the quick, does it not? Saying something behind someone's back. I worked with some people one time, and I would be in the office and I'd hear them talking about other people. And I walked away, and I had to ask myself, I wonder what they say about me when I'm not here. So then I have to ask myself today, am I that person that would talk about other people? And is that something in my character that needs to change? So just something to think about, and there are people who will say, oh, I tell it like it is. Most people that have to say that probably don't tell it like it is. There's extra bravado in that. The people who just are able to say it like it is without having to announce that they say it like it is, there's probably a modicum of more trust that you can give to the words than the person who says to you, I tell it like it is. Now, Brenda looked up the word proclivity because I don't think maybe it was a newer word or a new word to Brenda, and she has provided for us that word in the comments here. So let me put that comment. A tendency to choose or do something regularly, an inclination or predisposition toward a particular thing. It's such a big word so early in the day. More coffee, please. That is just comical, Brenda. That's okay. So more coffee. Let's do it. Here's the coffee. My first cup of the day, and I managed to keep it going down my throat. And Virgil, hopefully you're all right. You dozed off and dumped some coffee in your lap there. So hopefully you didn't burn yourself. Hopefully the coffee had cooled down enough. But yes, that word proclivity is kind of the predisposition. There you go. You defined it. It's a predisposition toward something. Verse 22 says, you've done that a few times, haven't you? Said things behind someone's back you wouldn't say to his face. Then he says, I tested everything in my search for wisdom. I'm going to go back to that verse 22. I'm convicted by that verse. I am. And I'm challenged by that verse. And while I might have reason to want to air a grievance, to go up another notch in character, to go up another notch in wisdom, to go up another notch in respectability, to go up another notch in trustability, to learn to not be that person who would say something about somebody else. I've done too much of that along the way. And sometimes we want to blame somebody else for the way that things are. And there might be truth to it, but especially if the person has moved on, or the people, or why bother? So I'm challenging myself publicly before you to just always take it up and to be able to zip the lips. And I know some of you say, well, we all need to vent. And may I vent to God? Just convicted by that thought. Going back to people I worked with years and years and years ago, and how they did, and to think, sometimes I do the same thing. I need to break that trend. Verse 23, he says, I have tested everything in my search for wisdom. I set out to be wise, but it was beyond me, far beyond me and deep, so deep. Does anyone ever find it? And again, thinking about this, pursuing after wisdom. In Solomon's pursuit of wisdom, he tried lots of things. There's nothing under the sun that Solomon did not try. And it does not say he was condemned for those things either. We tend to think, well, you're just stupid to go out and try everything. Well, maybe not. Sometimes I think we are harder on ourselves than perhaps God would be in some measures. And yet the things that we should be hard on ourselves about, that God would be hard on us about, we tend to wipe that under the rug, sweep that under the rug, brush it aside. No big deal. While we're convicted in heart that we shouldn't do thus and so, or we're convicted in heart that we should do thus and so. And yet we get all wrapped up in things that maybe don't really even matter. And yet the things that really do matter, we don't think much about those things. He said, I tested everything in my search for wisdom. I set out to be wise, but it was beyond me, far beyond me, and deep, oh so deep. Do we really find the wisdom? I think the wisdom of learning to walk with God, the wisdom of learning to engage a relationship with God each and every day. My friends, I believe that is wisdom. That God is looking in on us to enjoy, to engage God in our enjoyment of life. everything from the kitchen table enjoyment to the delights of the bedroom, to take God with us and engage with him and acknowledge his presence, I think, in living all the life. Now, the bedroom, that can be however you want to take that, the delights of sleep or the delights of sensual pleasure. To take God with us, to acknowledge his presence, to worship him there, to take God to work with us, to take God to market with us, to take God to the Y or the Bay Area Fitness Center or wherever it might be, to take God everywhere with us. I believe that is wisdom. Because when we know that we're taking God with us, the things that maybe mattered to us in our selfishness maybe matter less because of our acknowledgement of God. And the things that maybe we would have given ourselves to in our sinfulness, maybe we don't give ourselves to those things because we know that God is present. So learning to enjoy and to delight in, to acknowledge the ongoing presence with God, I believe that is wisdom. Now, let's continue in the passage. Verse 25 says, I concentrated with all my might, studying and exploring and seeking wisdom, the meaning of life. I also wanted to identify evil and stupidity, foolishness and craziness. And I think that is wisdom as well, to be able to look at and to acknowledge things that are evil, things that are stupid, things that are foolish, things that are crazy. He said, I concentrated with all my might. I studied, I'd explored. And for us to have the same inquisitive nature to want to explore and to know things and to find things out and to acknowledge that was very good, or that is quite evil, or that is foolish and stupid. Now, sometimes foolish and stupid is just downright fun. I like sometimes foolish and stupid. I do. Anybody else with me? I love to sneak up behind somebody and give them a start. You know, just to go hi and watch them jump out of their skin or jump up and bump the ceiling or something. I love to do stuff like that. I love practical jokes, that type of foolishness and craziness. But there's other foolishness and craziness that is just plain out stupid, and even perhaps even evil. He acknowledges the ability to discern the difference here. Verse 26 says, one discovery, a woman can be a bitter pill to swallow, full of seductive scheming and grasping. The lucky escape her, the undiscerning get caught. Now, some of you are going, wait a minute, why is he going after the women in that verse? What about the men? Well, I agree. Now, men will say a woman can be a bitter pill to swallow. Well, women might also say that a man can be a bitter pill to swallow. There are men who are seducers. Paul writes about that in 2 Timothy 3, about men who go after weak-willed women. And so he's saying, be careful. And now Priscilla's saying this because Solomon had 700 or so. I mean, if you are wired up at all, just to do the math, I mean, it's like he had like 2 women a day. So, I mean, he could be quite active if you're following what I'm saying. And even there, he decided it could be a bitter pill to swallow. And he experienced probably the scheming among his harem of women. Well, it's my day. No, it's my day. Well, no, it's my day. And the jealousy and all that perhaps came. Not much is said about that, but you have to wonder, what was it like for him? Could we not conclude that men and women can be bitter pills to each other? Can we not acknowledge, some of you women folk perhaps have been on the receiving end of seductive men? Or men who say things to you that maybe they ought not to say to you. And yet we acknowledge in our humanity, if we're honest, if we're really being honest and not playing the self-righteous game, that sometimes if you're a man, you could be a person who would be predisposed toward being flirtatious in that way. And if you're a woman, I mean, you could also be predisposed to receiving some of that. And for us to learn, look, I need to not be that way. I'm an older man now, and I'm just going to put this out there. Take it for what it's worth. I'm just going to say it in an ecclesiastical type of way, like you would read in the book of Ecclesiastes. When I was 20 or 30, I would not have looked at a 50-year-old woman the way that I might look at a 60 or 70-year-old woman today. Thanks, Brenda, saying way older. Thanks. It's true. I am way older now. But what that means is that there can be the temptation is a broader scope now. And I'm just being honest. If we need to acknowledge these things, that the temptation can be a broader scope, if that is at all something that you would be given toward. And in righteousness, we pursue Christ and we pursue after, but we also can acknowledge that, and I'm just being honest, I acknowledged already, I like to be crazy and foolish and that type of thing, but sometimes I need to have the wisdom to go, that's flirtatious. Don't do that. Now, he goes on and he said this, going back to the verse, it says, the lucky escape her, the undiscerning get caught. I mean, we can get caught. We can get caught in all kinds of different things. We can get caught, maybe not even sexually, but get caught emotionally to the tune where we actually like spending more time with a work colleague than we do with our own spouse because it's more fun, maybe. Maybe our spouse is an old fuddy-duddy and just not as fun to be around, and yet it's fun to be, and we'd rather be around. These are all things that the skeptical teacher is saying are realities, things that we have to guard against. And he says in verse 27, he says, at least this is my experience, what I, the quester, have pieced together as I've tried to make sense of life. Now, here we read this wisest man in the world, supposedly, saying, at least this is my experience. He is acknowledging that he was experienced. He doesn't say, well, I never did those things at all. He's saying, I did all those things, and this is what I learned from it. And so what do we learn from others? And I want to suggest to you that the wisest people are people who learn from the experiences and the mistakes of other people. So I've had other pastors that talk about, how many hours that we put in, and I've watched other pastors that get themselves into a pickle. Well, we have to learn from them. We need to learn lessons from them. Wisdom is us not making the same mistakes that other people have already made. So Solomon says, verse 27, at least this is my experience. He experienced the bitter pill. And perhaps you've experienced the bitter pill. The nice thing about a bitter pill, once you swallow it, is it dissipates and goes the way of the earth. There, I said that as nicely as I could. It will go away, but it might be a bitter pill to swallow. And we have to guard against those things. He says in verse 28, but the wisdom I've looked for, I haven't found. I didn't find one man or woman in 1,000 worth my while. Now that is a rather sad statement, is it not? Again, I've had some recent conversations about types of friends. And I was talking to some people about 2 weeks ago, and they said, look, we're just extremely judicious about who we spend time with. Now, they're not in the type of role that I'm in, okay, at all. And one of them, their work has nothing to do with maintaining a network of relationships. It's they deal with an individual and they move on to the next individual because that's the line of work that they're in. Their spouse is in a line of work where they're always dealing with people, but the people change every few years. And so it's just not the same. Me, it's long-term. I've been here 11 years. And so, all of the residue of my faults, failures, and foibles, has had a residual effect perhaps on people. And so much so that perhaps I would be the person that others would say of me, you're not a person worth my while. But to learn to be judicious in with whom you spend time. And I'm finding that the older I get, the less I give myself to any one individual beyond my spouse or even beyond my kids, only because there are so many demands out there. In fact, I've dealt with a person recently and I said, look, you don't call back as quickly as I would think you would call back. And it's like, well, you need to understand, I have literally dozens of people demands on me and deadlines and things that I have to meet. And I had to tell the person, if you were engaged in the life of our church and involved here, then maybe you would get to me sooner. But we have people who are part of our church that need my attention and need my time, and they're going to get first dibs. And I have 24 hours in a day like anybody else does. And that might be hard for you to hear somebody say, but that's reality, folks. And for all of us to say, but who are those close people? I will not name people here locally because I don't want to disappoint anybody. But I would say back in Pennsylvania, and I've already mentioned our friends, the Bears, they are if we're going to choose people to spend time with, we're going to choose the Bears. If we're going to choose people to spend time with going away, most likely, we are going to choose Kyle and Jackie if we're going to go away. That's my son and daughter-in-law. We're going to be judicious. And maybe some of you have been in that same type of situation where you're traveling and everybody wants you to come see them, but you can't go see everybody. You just can't. And when we would come to Maine before we lived here, we got to the point where we said, look, we will have one gathering where everybody can come see us. Otherwise, we're spending our entire vacation time going to different people's homes. Now, that might sound bad to you, but we wanted to go relax some. We wanted to go see some things. And so the experience that he's talking about in verse 28, I didn't find one man or woman in 1,000 worth my while. Now, I want to add one other piece here, and I guess I'm going to have to change the title of today's broadcast because we've only looked at chapter 7. But who are you mentoring up with? Who are you reaching up to pull you up higher? Who are you reaching down to pull them up higher? I mean, the idea of finding a man or woman in 1,000 worth my while. I mean, I'm asking myself that same question. Who do I reach up to? Some people would say, well, how do you reach up? Because there are plenty of philosophers and theologians who are far more astute than am I. And in wisdom, rather than saying, well, I'm not on par with them, I shouldn't be around them, the wisdom is, no, I should be around them. I should engage them to strengthen myself. Who are you reaching out to as a woman to help you be strengthened as a woman? Who are you reaching out to as a man to help you be strengthened as a man? And in the same vein, to whom are you reaching out? We are called to be disciple makers. If you are not making a disciple of someone else, you are not fulfilling the Great Commission. I'm not saying go out and win people to Christ. That's a different issue. I'm talking about discipling somebody. At our men's breakfast on Saturday morning, we walked down this road of saying, men, if you had 5 things to tell another Christian man that for them to succeed in their Christian life, what would they be? Same thing for you as a woman. If you were to think through, if there were 5 things I was going to tell another Christian woman for them to succeed in their Christian life, what would they be? Now, the list might be 3. I don't think it's 3. I think that's too few. It might be 7. It might be 10. It might be a list of 22 things. It could be all kinds of, but what would you say? To who are you reaching up to pull you up in your own growth? And who are you reaching across to that it's a peer level? And who are you reaching down to? I think that there is wisdom in that, and to find that 1 in 1,000 persons that is worthwhile in that sense to help you in your development. Verse 29. Yeah, I did spot one ray of light in this murk. God made men and women true and upright. We're the ones who've made a mess of things. I mean, he does acknowledge that men and women are made upright, and he does acknowledge that we also mess things up. I mean, stop blaming everybody else. We would look at ourselves and blame ourselves, and we're the ones often. And listen, if the slipper fits, Cinderella, put it on, okay? If you've made the mess, say, I did it. I made the mess. I mean, have you ever been around people where they're making messes and yet it's everybody else's fault? If the slipper fits, put it on. Acknowledge it. Say, it is I. I am the one. And then let God deal with you and deal with your humility, and maybe deal in humility by going to somebody else and say, I'm the one that just mucked it all up. So, well, anyway, this was Ecclesiastes chapter 7. As we work through the Message paraphrase today, trying to get insights, tomorrow we'll pick up and go on over to chapter 8. We'll go back to the NIV 84 version, and we'll go from there. So let me pray you into your day. Lord, thank you for the time we could spend looking at your word. We've been challenged by it. We've been convicted by it. Lord, now help us to live it, that we might honor you, that we might glorify you, that we might make your name and your fame great. In Jesus' name, amen. Friends, have a great day. A reminder, there is a women's study tonight at 6:30, studying the armor of God right here at Veracity Chapel. Our sign blew away, so it has the old name back out there. Don't be discouraged or confused by that. It is what it is. We'll get that sign replaced here soon enough. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you later.